Thank you so much for your Holy Spirit. And even though we are what feels like permanently trapped in this flesh, and it's gross and it's limiting and it leads us astray, you're going to take it all away someday. And it's not a fantasy, it's not a story, it's a promise. And that renewing that you're going to give to us, we don't know what it's going to be like, but that's really half of the fun. It's just knowing that you're a God that cannot lie. You don't turn to the left or to the right. And when you call us up, it's going to be amazing. So God, thank you so much for these promises. We don't need the details. We have you. And that's so much more than enough. And tonight we have your word. It's complete. There's no errors. And I get to share it with some people that I care a lot about. So thank you for that privilege, dear God. Thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ. And it's in him and through him that I do pray tonight. Amen. All right, cool. So tonight's message is called Sidestepping Spammers. Did everybody get an outline? I made some. Okay, cool. I didn't hand them out, so thanks, Sarah. And when I say I didn't have to step out of my comfort zone too far, this continually and I promise you guys I'm not being lazy or anything like that. This was my reading on, I think, Monday. And I as I always do, I call Sarah into the office. Oh, this chapter was so cool. And we go back and forth, and I'm like, this is for Wednesday. So this is just where I happen to be, my own personal reading. And the really cool part about it is I don't have to manufacture any of these revelations or any of these things that God is showing and teaching me. And I'm really thankful for that. Just the fact that the Bible stands on its own 2 feet. You don't need to dress it up. You don't need to fancy it up or make slideshows and use lasers. And so that's all we're going to do tonight is we're just going to go through what might seem like an obscure chapter. It sure was to me. Nehemiah 6. And I just couldn't get it out of my head. I quickly knew this is what I wanted to prepare for this evening. And then just like I said before the prayer, to set that context or that foundation for everyone and why maybe it jumped off the page at me. I hope that maybe it'll do the same to you. We've all had one of these next 3 examples I'm going to share with you happen in our life, perhaps more than once. And so I'm not going to use names or anything like that because these are personal to myself or the family by extension. But the first one is, and these are all quite recent, and this is the reason why Nehemiah 6 just hit me so hard. There was a girl who reached out to Sarah, someone that is in a place of influence that was at one point really important in our lives. And it's not like we had a bridge burned or anything like that. We're still on somewhat decent terms with them, but it used to be the wife of a former employer of mine. And so she reached out of the blue to Sarah after a couple years of just incommunicado. They were like ghosts in the wind. We didn't really know what they were up to. We didn't know they still had our phone number. Actually, it was Instagram, so it wasn't a text message. And to condense the story down as much as possible without losing too much of the effect, it was one of those mysterious type, let's get together sort of things. Sarah's natural response was, hey, what's going on? I haven't heard from you in a long time. What's this all about? That's a normal question. And then to seal the deal, and this isn't where it ends, but for tonight's example, it can be. It was, golly, it's really hard to explain through text. Why don't you let me buy you a coffee? I have this opportunity I think that you'd be primo for, man, you're just so great. I don't know what it was. Sarah ended up really standing up for herself because we've been down that path many times before, whether it's, a lot of the pyramid type companies, whether it was an Arbonne or a Rodan and Fields, we don't know. And it's kind of cool that we didn't, because one of the things I do know about this family and by this lady who reached out to Sarah, they're not used to being told no. And I think that's why they had the confidence after 3-4 years, and I'm being quite conservative, maybe more, out of the blue to believe that they could dictate to us how our schedule is going to be run so that we could hear about this too good to pass up opportunity. Example number 2 is someone else in my extended family actually did get involved into one of the aforementioned companies that I just shared with you. And it was really done more so just to get a discount on the products. I think we've all been there. I worked at Taco Bell to get a great discount on Taco Bell. It was free. Those were the good old days. Now I got to pay for it, and they still mess the order up. So anyways, she got involved in this company, and she was really, really honest up front. This person I'm speaking of is a business owner and just involved in full-time work. This wasn't going to be a primary line of income. However, in a very short amount of time, this predatory type company was all about, you need to come to the meetings, you know. I mean, they basically went the whole 9 yards all the way up to, you got to drink this Kool-Aid, don't worry about what we're pouring in it. And it's just really that cultish type mentality of why they're a billion-dollar corporation, and the people that are 14 and a half tiers below them really never get ahead, but they still have to annoy all of their friends and family and their cell phone's contact list. And I don't know if I'm striking a nerve with any of the people here. We're predominantly a male audience tonight. I don't have a whole lot of people reach out to me to sell eyelash growth serum. But the third and final example, just by way of a kind of an intro to what we'll speak on tonight, is what I had said earlier. And this message is being recorded, so it's far from me to try to embarrass anyone or call anyone out. But one of the members, or not members, I'm sorry, but one of the attendees who has been coming here, it's been speculated with some proof that they may be here under false pretenses. And so you just have to address that as a church. You have to practice church discipline. And as the pastor, which I'm certainly not, but who asked me to exercise some church discipline, I was very happy to do that. I'm not going to lie, I wasn't looking forward to it. My pulse was racing, but it's really nice knowing that I was entrusted to carry out those orders, so to speak, as the messenger boy, you know, just marching orders. And the message tonight could not have been more perfect. And I didn't really come to these conclusions, or even the gentleman that I'm speaking about tonight, until after the notes were completely finalized and proofread and printed. And so it's really cool how God works all this stuff out. And I'm just kind of geeking out about it, because every single time that pastor says, hey, can you fill in for me, you know, here, there, or in between? And I'm always like, of course, man, that's awesome. I'd love to. Thanks for thinking of me. Then comes the logical next step of, man, what am I going to talk about? So God just gave this to me. It was a layup. So I'm going to read the introduction here at the top of your sheet. Oh, but before I do, there's a subtitle here, as I always do. Redeem the time, don't waste it. So again, the message tonight, sidestepping, getting around the spammers. They're not going anywhere. We have to. Redeem the time, don't waste it. And our first Bible reference is in Ephesians 5, right before we get into that awesome chapter of 6 about putting on the whole armor of God. But it's going to be just a couple verses here back to back. So Ephesians 5, verses 15, 16, and 17. If you guys want to turn there, I will speak slowly and methodically as you flip. I don't know what the cool way is that pastors do it, but they always fill that time slot so perfectly. That'll be something that I probably learn down the road as I'm up here more. So I'll just start. All right, so verse 15 in Ephesians 5. See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. Compare and contrast. So fools being always paranoid, but as wise. God wants us to know what's going on around us. Verse 16. Redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Wherefore, be ye not unwise, he's mentioned this twice now, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. Now, I used to think that will of the Lord was something that was just an enigma. I mean, this was like a puzzle. How do you figure this thing out? I want to be a good Christian. How do I know I'm in the will of the Lord? You know, is an angel going to show up at the footpost of my bed like it did that young girl back in 1830 when the pre-trib hoax got started? Well, no. We know what God's will is. It's right here, and it's been preserved in our language. As a matter of fact, depending on who you talk to, it's 6th, maybe 7th grade English. This isn't advanced stuff because, like we've been hearing a lot about from some of our guest pastors that have been coming through, God puts the cookies on the bottom shelf, or as I call it, the low-hanging fruit. You can be in his will because he told you how to do it. Always be in prayer, always be in that season of prayer. Don't make silly decisions, and as we just saw here twice, don't be unwise, don't be foolish. I love it. Very, very cool. So there's nothing new under the sun, as we'll see. People who don't accomplish their goals will gladly and happily derail you from yours. They'll hit the brakes for you, is my point. And if we think hard enough tonight, before we get into the scripture, you can let your mind wander a little bit just so you kind of connect with the message. But we have been there before, all of us, probably, like I said, several times. So these next two references, they're single verses. Don't feel the need to turn there. certainly can if you want, but I'm just going to bust through these so we can get into the content tonight. Ecclesiastes 1, verse 9 says, "The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done." You kind of see like the merry-go-round here of history. "And there is no new thing under the sun." We're so familiar with part 2 or part B of that verse, but the context before it, as I always find 100% of the time, really is the part that just shatters the backboard, because it sets you up for that sort of like poster cliche that you might see in an office building somewhere. But we're familiar with that, but what does God use to lead up to that? And that's where the power is at. And then in just reference 3 here, we're going to go to Proverbs chapter 6, verse 34. And it says, "For jealousy is the rage of a man." Matt Powell spoke about this a little bit on Sunday as he visited from Michigan. "Therefore, he will not spare in the day of vengeance." And my belief is that that day of vengeance is for us personally as God chastises us. But on a much broader scale, and I think we can all agree with this, that day of vengeance, the day of the Lord, these are all synonymous with one another. And that is coming. God's warned us of it. He hasn't warned us of it because he wants to entertain us. This again, and this isn't even the point of my message tonight, but this again points a finger back to the fraud of the pre-tribulation rapture. And it sounds great, the secret rapture in the twinkling of an eye, like a thief in the night. There's just a pile of clothes on the floor, like we also heard about on Sunday. And it's really cool because all these guest speakers that we've had come through, man, it's just all really gluing together what I have to share from Nehemiah tonight. So I'm going to read this introduction here, and then we'll just do part 1, 2, and 3. Nehemiah was wise not to take the advice, as Gabe read earlier, cower in fear from intimidation, or stop his very important work to have a foolish, most likely fruitless, conversation with Sanballat and his gang. So Sanballat's like, he's the bad guy in Nehemiah 6. Nehemiah 6 demonstrates an important lesson as applicable today as it certainly was back then. Don't be drawn or pushed kind of by that pressure of those people I spoke about earlier who were just relentless, into the void of time wasting by the time wasters. We can assume Nehemiah's enemies knew their letters, and they sent several, wouldn't stop the work on the wall, but rather slow it through distraction. This is really a tried and true tactic of our adversary. We know who that is, or at least who he sends after us. But Nehemiah was laser focused on the task at hand. Some might even argue to a fault. I don't. I love his laser focus. As important as Nehemiah's steadfastness was, he was also an effective leader. And here's the big takeaway, because he prepared the people to be dual-purposed in both building and bulwarking. It's a real word, and it goes together. It's 2 B's. I'm super excited about that. That just means that it's both offense and defense. And we're going to read that here after we get to our reference 4. But in Nehemiah 6, as Gabe read, these guys are building. I kind of think of it in my mind's eye as laying down some mortar between bricks. They're building that wall up again. And by the way, they did it in under 2 months. That's awesome. And then on the other hand, they have a spear or a sword or something to where, in a sense, I know God didn't mean it that way, but it's kind of comical because they're focusing on their craftsmanship of this wall. They want to make sure it's reinforced, and then hey, all right. They're kind of like looking behind them to make sure no one's coming. All right, one guy's with me too. All right, great. That's all I needed. Our other reference is actually from Nehemiah, but I pulled this out 2 chapters earlier in Nehemiah 4 and verse 17. Since you guys are so close, why don't you hop, skip, and jump over to your left? So chapter 4, 17. This is where I just got that whole illustration. "They which build it on the wall, and they that bear burdens," so this is everyone just kind of collaborating with one another, "with those that laid it, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work," whatever that was, laying bricks, pushing a wheelbarrow, I don't know, "and with the other hand held a weapon." So it doesn't say spear, it doesn't say sword. Could have been another brick. I mean, you can use bricks for weapons, but we don't know. It's just really cool. Offense and defense simultaneously. Talk about your multitasking. And they had to be, right? Because they were really encompassed all about with these fraudsters, with these people that wanted to get at them. And when that happens, when you're prepared, like I all caps and underline, then at least you know what's coming and you're not surprised when the attack unfolds. That's the best way to be defensive. So section A, an invitation, quote unquote, missing the most important element, the why. This is kind of the first example that I share with you guys tonight, that little anecdote to where someone just really tried to honeypot Sarah, dangle that carrot and say, why don't we meet? And Sarah's like, yeah, I'm pretty busy. What do you want to talk about? And then all of a sudden, they disappeared. So it wasn't, the letter that got sent wasn't saying, here's why we want to meet, you know? And this is the guy that's overseeing the work that's being done for God, by the way. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem are speculating in their gossip circles just as chapter 6 starts. Their assumptions shape into a paranoid delusion. It doesn't take long, guys. When you're at work, a lot of us aren't always happy in our jobs. I mean, that's normal. You know, tomorrow's always a new day. But whenever you get around another coworker or three, and you guys are talking about, yeah, he didn't schedule me off on Saturday. I have a personal day. Or I actually had a lot of complaints. I used to manage a Aldi grocery store chain. And I did like everything I could, man. And at the end of the day, most people were happy with me. I mean, like the executives above me were happy with what we were doing as a store. But I just remember the pettiness and like the whisper circles that went on. Yeah, I think he favors so-and-so. I didn't really care. I didn't like favor anybody. They make you do so many things at that store. You don't really have time to play popularity games. And I think that's really what's going on here is they're like, what's that wall going up for? I don't know. Maybe they're just really into restoration and they want to protect the city. We probably have a wall around our city. But no, it quickly devolved into, yeah, they're probably trying to kick us out. They're going to appoint this guy to be king. They're going to overtake us. All right, let's get together some pitchforks and torches and go get these guys. I mean, you can almost see this thing unfolding. So that's what's going on. And here's where it all led, right? It caused them to mischievously invite Nehemiah to a meeting under false pretenses. So even in their cowardly act, they were cowards. They weren't, at least they're sending a letter or, you know, like a raven or whatever. I don't know how that worked back then. But basically Nehemiah gets the information and he's like, yeah, that's a no for me. And they get a little bit mad. So what do? And I'm stealing my own thunder here. Not that there's no thunder. But they send like redundant letters, almost like, and that's the whole reason why sidestepping spammers is the message tonight. It's like those emails. You know you unsubscribed to those emails. You've got a confirmation bubble that made you feel all warm and fuzzy about the fact that you're never going to get an email from that company again. And then what happens tomorrow? Well, you didn't unsubscribe from our super special deals. I've actually had that happen recently. My sister's trying to help me out with that. She's 19. She knows all the cool things to do. But these are definitely spammers. So imagine if you want someone to stop the work they're doing, whatever it is, right? You're jealous, you're covetous, I don't know. But if they're building a nice house on the hill and you don't think they deserve that nice house, what are you going to do? Call the zoning department. Really, these are things that aren't going to stop the house from ultimately becoming a home and them pulling in. But it's going to slow the process down. And it's super annoying. So thanks to Nehemiah's discernment, and so far, Nehemiah hasn't faltered in his discernment. God has really blessed him with that. We find our first lesson, not to be dissuaded from godly missions and service by who? The world. I mean, these guys are a perfect picture of the world. We might not ever encounter our own Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. I'm like 100% certain we're not. But these guys are a picture of the world. They're just a metaphor. Because when you're doing a work for God, it doesn't have to be a great exploit that they're going to sing songs about someday. But if you're living a godly life, you're staying on that straight and narrow, and you're sharing it with other people, and you're being a living testimony, you're in the Word, someone's going to want to stop you. And if it's not the world, it's Satan or his minions that he's going to send after you. And that's what's going on here. So they're just slowing down his work. Think about this. They're already at 50% efficiency, right? What if they could use both hands to lay the mortar? Even better. But they have to be circumspect, like we talked about earlier. Satan has trained a vast army of unwitting, I say unwitting because we see what's going on around us and just in our culture here in the United States, unwitting soldiers across Earth, with unprecedented success right here through movies and media. Because of the ever-present influence of Satan, and by extension his legion of minions, what's happened? We've witnessed an ongoing, headlong plunge into wickedness by the lost. And we don't have time, but just today I could share a story with you about something that blew my mind. And more disturbingly, the deterioration of the church into like bizarro land, or I had bizarre vanity down here. That's because there really is no church anymore. By the way, the church isn't the building, the church is us, the church is the believers. And if you're going to call yourself a Christian, that means you're a little Christ, you're a Christ follower. And if you deviate from that, save me the aggravation and just don't call yourself that, because it doesn't make sense. And more than likely, I'm going to call you out on it, whether it's to your face or most likely on Instagram. So on our last bullet point here, just in part A, this covers verses 1 through 5. It's like a third, and third. Nehemiah boldly and humorously, I love his response, answers each one of these 5 spam letters. And the Bible actually makes it seem like they're really just like carbon copies. In like manner, I imagine Nehemiah's replies were like lumps of hot coals being heaped upon their heads. Those aren't really my words. I, of course, got that from Proverbs 25:22. It says, "For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee." So this is kind of like along the lines of not answering a fool according to his folly. And that verse to me shows the duality of, yes, we're supposed to stick up for God even if the other person is being foolish, but we're not supposed to engage in their foolish behavior in order to say, I'm a Christian, I believe the Bible. So this can go in so many different directions. The context of that, we know context is king, it's the most important, is this is your enemies, right? You're supposed to turn the other cheek. You're supposed to say, oh man, you stole a coat off my back, you want my shirt too. But that's what Nehemiah is doing. He's not inflaming the situation. He's just saying, oh, hey, maybe you guys didn't get my first response. I said, no. Here's a second letter. Here's a third, fourth, and fifth letter. The answer hasn't changed. And that's exactly what Nehemiah is doing. So that leads us, bam, right into the middle of this chapter, which is super powerful. Look at all that bold I used. The rumor mill is finally broken. The rumor I'm talking about before, when these 3 guys were conspiring in their darkly lit rooms probably, after 5 carbon copy letters. So verses 6 through 11 give us a look into the situation. Sanballat and his cronies, they gossip themselves into a panicky corner. So what happens? Now they're ready to attack, right? Arriving at a conclusion before hearing the whole matter, using their heathen concocted presupposition as a pretext for enmity towards Nehemiah. They don't like this guy. I don't even think they don't know why they don't like him, because again, they've yet to reach out to them. During all of their communications, have you guys ever seen that they asked him any questions? Hey, why are you building that wall? Are you our enemy? Are you our friend? Are you our foe? What's going on, man? We just want to know. No, they're basically trying to get him out into the open. We don't know what their motives are, but the Bible, right there in the first verses, chapter 6 kicks off, says they're his enemies. So they don't have great things planned for this guy once they get him out in the open without his defense around him. That's a safe conclusion. So, talking about the enmity toward Nehemiah, unearned, by the way, I thought that Proverbs 18, verse 13 was very fitting. I've actually shared this with someone in the past before, and things didn't go well. Another time. So Proverbs 18:13 says, "He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him." So it's not just foolish, it's pathetic. I mean, it's shameful. And here's something where I can fall on my own sword, so to speak, is that I don't want to say 100%. I don't have a robotic memory, but in a huge majority of the situations where I've tried to reason my way to what the future is going to hold, whatever that person is thinking, whatever they're trying to do for me or toward me, it has not been 100% wrong, but it's definitely been off track. I actually had a phone call today with a former business associate who wants to go back into business, and I think the guy's great. He's a super sharp guy, and that's why it's important never to burn bridges. But until he shared the full context with me about what his plans were for myself and Sarah and my small business, I didn't think that it was going to be worth my time. Boy, I'm sure glad I took the call. And guess what? God already knew all these things before. So I believe that I can connect A to B. Maybe I can, but I definitely can't connect A to Z, and that's where God fills in the gap. So never answer a matter or come to your own conclusions until you give that person or persons a chance to let you know what's going on. This was something cool that I verified before I put it in my notes. So they proclaim with unjustified certainty the walls are an open act of rebellion against the king and kingdom. And this was odd. You see 666 here. This was weird to me. And I'm not a numerologist. I don't look into all that kind of stuff. I think that I just don't have the time. That's kind of other people's game that they like to play. And sometimes it's convincing. But Ephesians is the 16th book. I counted like 3 times. So it's the 16th book. This is the 6th chapter and the 6th verse. And not that God has any huge plan for these numbers here. This is probably something that I'm reading into Scripture. But isn't it weird that the one verse in this entire chapter that talks about open rebellion as they're trying to build up defenses around Jerusalem has Satan's number on there? Yeah, that's super interesting. Wow. Nehemiah's most pointed reply during this chapter, I read this like 3 times because this was like a fist pump sort of a moment for me, was my overall inspiration for tonight's message. In verse 8b, in one let's read it. Let's do it. So in verse 8, just the second half, let's read the whole thing. Then I sent unto him, saying, there are no such things done as thou sayest. He's talking to these contrarians that keep sending him letters. But, here's the best part, thou feignest them out of thine own heart. So Nehemiah, he just stays true to what he's doing, to the mission. I mean, this is like the one and only time we see that he deviates from the mission, from the oversight of the building, to answer these guys, the only verse, right? And he's like, listen, we're not doing what you think we are. And as a matter of fact, your imagination has really gotten away with you. So that's my answer. I hope it's sufficient for you. I'm going to get back to work. And then he punches back in and he goes. So I love the fact that, yeah, he definitely stopped his work to respond to these guys, but he also wants to be blameless. He wants to provide a sufficient answer. And I thought that was just great. As soon as I read that, that's really where I knew I got to put some notes together and get this ready for Wednesday. In one decisive response, Nehemiah squashed the drama and dashed the hopes of the enemies to either stop or slow the rebuilding, stating, this is all in your heads, goofballs. And Romans 1:21 is really perfect for this. And it reads, because that, Romans 1 is really a powerful intro to one of the most powerful books in the Bible, just talking about homosexuality and the horrible abomination that is to God. But we can also glean other things from that passage. So let me read this word for word. Verse 21 in Romans. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. I have some handwritten notes here that it's definitely worth sharing, but not more than God's word. So maybe another time here. But I want to get back to my message. I wish I could have got to it. But isn't this just a perfect description from a totally different book, a totally different author, a totally different time in history to where God reveals to us what does it mean to have a darkened heart? And also, we all retain God in our heart, don't we? We all know that he exists. Scripture tells us that. Only a fool says that there is no God. So these guys are just probably like at DEFCON 5 right now, just ready to wage war against Nehemiah, which quickly comes, by the way. A little spoiler alert for you guys. After Sanballat was confronted with Nehemiah's immovable position, he indirectly continues his campaign against the building with a new tactic he probably thought was a clever sort of fight fire with fire strategy. What am I talking about? This is in verse 11. But he's inviting Shemaiah to hide in his home court or the temple. This is the temple. You can't really use it as a safe house, right? I mean, that's cowardly as well. In verse 11, just so we know exactly what's going on here, what we see is that, first of all, Nehemiah is saving himself so much aggravation, unneeded annoyance, because he's immovable. And once someone knows that you're movable in your Christian life, in your Christian walk, they will just leave you alone. They might make little videos on YouTube about you, a la Matt Powell, and that's awesome, because if the world's not persecuting you, maybe you're not doing enough for God. It might be something smaller. Daniel, you're still in school. It might be your students in your classes. I don't know. And then for a lot of you other guys, even Daniel, another example using you just started a new job. It probably won't be long until they realize, like we've all probably been there, something's different about this guy, man. Why don't you take smoke breaks? I don't think I've ever heard you cuss. Why are you so friendly all the time? Those questions will always be a great way to open that door to witnessing. We know that. But there's something different about us. So what happened? They redirected all of their effort immediately. Nehemiah's a lost cause, guys. What else you got in your little bag of strategies? Well, why don't we try to intimidate him into just quitting? And that's what's going on right here. So there's a whole lot happening in this chapter. It's really cool. Verse 11 in chapter 6 reads, "And I said, should such a man as I flee? And who is there that, being as I am, would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in." So many characters in the Bible, they're not what you would call loquacious, verbose. They're not using these big 4, 5, 6 syllable words, but man, they say what needs to be said. And then there's this little period at the end, and the enemy has no choice but to say, okay, or put your dukes up. And this is really cool because this guy is saying, man, if my peers, if my contemporaries, if my coworkers who are out there building the wall right now, if they're not going to go hide under their mattress, I'm certainly not. And I'm for sure not going to do it in the temple, because if I lock like we read about here in the following verse, if I lock the doors up to the temple and this is my little hideaway, they're going to bust the doors down. So now, out of my cowardice, I'm going to bring destruction into God's house as well. No, I'm not going to do that. But thanks for the offer. I love it. So cool. And then as far as fear as a tactic, it'd be a little bit silly not to just quickly reference this. I mean, can you guys think of anything recently where fear has been used as a control mechanism? I don't know. Well, maybe we'll get there someday. And then let's finish it all up, hopefully with a little bit of a bang, but just part C here, the wall was finished. Exclamation point. This is awesome because a lot of times the Bible will give us godly exploits of godly men. They'll do everything right by the book, and then you'll see some failure at the end. Not here, not in chapter 6. So this is really cool. It's like a victory parade. After refusing to flee in fear, using the temple as a safe house from imagined persecutors, excuse me, because one thing that you'll notice is they never identify an enemy. They're just saying, hey, some people are probably coming after you. You better hightail it out of here, man. Lock yourself in the temple. So these are imagined persecutors. We see what? At full capacity, everyone's working. We see the wall finalized at warp speed, different than operational warp speed, reinforced by godly wisdom, helping to avoid possible pitfalls right up to the final hour when they lay that last brick. I'm sure that was a really cool moment for these guys, where they finally finish the wall, they get to lay down their arms, they get to rest, and they get to know that they're now surrounded by the wall. And that wall, to me, is a perfect picture of Jesus Christ. It doesn't mean that we have a force field around us where we can dodge bullets and we're never going to get harmed. What it does mean is that if we do get hit by a bullet or we do get harmed, we know where we're going to end up. So that's our perfect wall of Jesus Christ around us. Verse 12, I have a little note here to myself. Oh, this is about the godly discernment, and one of the main reasons why all through chapter 6 we see all these attacks, but the work never veers. They finish. So chapter 6, verse 12. And lo, I perceived that God had not sent him. So they're not being fooled, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me. For Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. So this guy was a gunslinger. He was a hired wolf, probably not even in sheep's clothing, but he was doing his best. He was a con artist coming through, again, to try to disrupt this work. But here's the best defense. Not an offense, but it's just knowing godly wisdom. It's having that from God. How do we get that? Prayer, being in his word, surrounding ourselves with other Christians, being in church on a Wednesday night. Those are all great ways that are pieces to that puzzle to fill in the edges. So, our second to last bullet point here. After seeing so many potential detours, hurdles, and roadblocks avoided with clairvoyance, I mean, it's almost like a miracle, right? We should pause and take inventory of the teachable moments that God's provided for us. Speaking of that, in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 5, talking about that circumspect or that clairvoyance of knowing what's going to happen just by having God's wisdom. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 5 reads, "Not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God." It's always been one of my favorite verses. I'm not the kind of guy, I'll admit this now because, everyone will find out sooner or later, really. I can read a passage and I can know it by heart, but I don't know where it's from. I just don't. I have to use Blue Letter Bible. So when I got to this, I was doing a word search trying to find a parallel that would really pump up this final point here. I was like, that's one of my favorite verses. Thanks a lot for letting me use that one, God. So while it's not, don't let me skip that. So right here on the end, we're wrapping up, but Nehemiah treated the threats not by dismissing or ignoring them, kind of pretending they don't exist, right? I have a tendency to do that sometimes. I procrastinate because there's other tasks to do. But quickly addressing and diffusing them. One doesn't work without the other. You can't just address it. Hey guys, I know you want to kill me. I know you want to stop the work. All right, have a good one. That's just addressing it. You really have to diffuse it. You got to cut the red wire, whatever it might be. And speaking of diffusing, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 9, it reads, "But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many," I have that underlined, "many foolish and hurtful lusts." So that's the sin that besets us, right? But what this verse is saying, what God is saying, is it's a multitude of sin because you let it fester, which drown men in destruction and perdition. So as that verse ends with the word perdition, that really makes me think of that son of perdition, or that man of perdition being revealed. So just in this verse, there's so many teachable moments because that's a type of the Antichrist. So many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. That's what God did to cleanse the earth back in Noah's day. And then we even see a reference to the Antichrist here. So let's wrap it up and put a bow on it here. While it's not wise or sustainable, we can't keep this up long term. To keep people at a distance through a hypercritical, suspicious worldview, that's not healthy. It is wise, just like we started, to be circumspect, knowing others by their fruits. And that's our final reference before we just get to our wrap-up final thought. But Matthew 7:20, there are a whole lot to choose from here, even in Matthew 7 up earlier in verse 13. But Matthew 7:20 says, "Wherefore, by" what? "Their fruits ye shall know them." Man, this is like any tree. You want to know what you're getting into, what you're going to eat? Think about it this way. You don't walk into Sam's Club and go back to the produce section and it says produce up there and it's got a huge chilled room and there's tons of options to choose from. You got your organics, your naturals, and then you start looking at the boxes individually and they're all white square boxes with little question marks on it. Almost like, hey, what you buy is what you get. No, it's labeled. And we're supposed to do the same things as Christians walking circumspectly. We're supposed to mark them, but it's not all negative. We're also supposed to uplift them and encourage them if they're doing God's work. And that's what we're supposed to do at church. So we want to know who they are. We want to label them. And how do we know? Bible talks a whole lot about that. By their fruits. Bible talks a whole lot about vines and gardening and fruits. But I just thought that was very, very appropriate. So my final thought for tonight is be cautious not to lean, at least exclusively, on your own understanding. Pray for God's guidance, and here's the big three that affects all of us: relationships, friendships, and partnerships. Gathering the wheat, scattering the tares, and sidestepping the spam. Cool. I'll close in a word of prayer, and then we'll actually have prayer in the church.